Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three prakim Rambam, beginning with Hilchos, Tumas, Oicholen, the final Pedic Tezayin. And we're starting with Hashem's help today, Hilchos Kalim, learning prakim Aleph and Beis. Firstly, Hilchos, Tumas, Oicholen, Pedic Tezayin is the chapter that's going to speak about how do we view foods whose history we don't know, whether we can presume that the foods are tahor, or whether we have to presume that the foods are tamei. And we're going to have at the end of this pedic a general approach concerning remaining pure. As we know, midoi raisa, unless you plan to go into the Beis Hamikdash, unless you plan to eat kachim, one does not need to be in a state of halachic tahara. A person is allowed to eat foods that are tameim if the foods are chulim. Nevertheless, we keep on learning about, especially this man by Yesheni, of large group of Yidden that took upon themselves to behave beyond the letter of the law. They are called Perushim. They are called the Hasidim Rishonim. And we're going to learn about that. And we're going to conclude the chapter speaking about the ideal of maintaining a level of Tara beyond the letter of the law. Pedic Shisha Asar has 12 halachas. Let's begin with halacha Aleph, says the Rambam. Kol ha'agudai shabashvakim, all bundles of vegetables that you find in the marketplace, chol hakamachim, and all of the flowers that you find, b'chol asalosais, and all of the fine flour that you find in the marketplace, yidin becheskas muchsharim, we presume that they became wet, conforming the rules that we have been learning over the last couple of chapters with one of the liquids, one of the 7 liquids, that if it was water, it was uprooted b'ritzoin balim. The product was wetted b'ritzoin balim. In other words, the Rambam explains, why do we say that bundles of vegetables are presumed to are becoming wet? Because that's the way it works. It's common practice to constantly sprinkle water on them, like we mentioned, because they look fresher. Flour and even more fine flour. Yes, first they are washed. In other words, we're speaking about the grain that are washed prior to them being ground, because the more you wash out all of the residue of the klipa, the finer, the whiter they become. So that's the presumption. And similarly, if you have kernels of wheat that are crushed in a mill, some of them were crushed into one, some of them were crushed twice, some of them were crushed 3 times. These are all different types of techniques of making what we call today oatmeal, or the pre-steps of the oatmeal. Like these types of kernels of wheat are also, they were made wet. Not only if they're found in the marketplace, but even if you find them in people's homes, because that's the way of the world. They were washed, they were made wet, and it's done with its balim, and it's done with, if it mayim was used, mayim that were also uprooted with its balim, lahasar klipasim. Now we're going to put 2 rules together. Once you have a food item that is becheskas muchshar, is it tamei? Yes, it is. Why? Halacha beis. Kol elu shehem becheskas muchsharim, hand in hand. Harein becheskas tumam. Why is that? Bepnei shehakoil memashmishin bahen. Everyone touches these foods, and therefore they're muchsharim. Al kulam nemar. However, on all of the above, nemar nama aretz leima lo yuchshiru. He's allowed to say that. That don't have a chazaka, that lo yuchshuru, which is nice. In other words, in certain areas, he's not neman regarding himself. But if he's saying that food item never became wet, we believe him. Other than that testimony, in the Aleph, we presume it got wet. Beis, since these are foods that everyone is touching, most people are becheskas, that they're tamei, so therefore the foods are tamei. Halacha gimel. Kol hadagim becheskas muchsharim. All fish are presumed also to have been made muchshar. In other words, we're going to see in a moment, guys, that if the fish is simply brought up in the net, if you don't turn the net over them, spilling the water on them, remember that, then that was the whole sugya. then the waters are not yet considered waters that were uprooted b'ratzon. But we'll get there in a moment. And over there, it's such a chazaka that all fish were made wet after they died. Because it's that common. In other words, you have to remember like this, that once something is becheskas muchshar, it's going to be becheskas tuma. Because whoever, it's in the markets, everyone is buying it, everyone is selling it, everyone is touching it, it became tumah. Now, hadagim, whether they were tzaddan b'chedam, whether they were caught in a large net, whether they were caught in a kafif, which means a small net, in a snare, im loy niad esamatzuda leim. Here's very important: if the net was not turned over them, then we say, and if you know that to be a fact, then loy huchsharu, they're not muchshar. Because when you remove the net from the water, this is interesting. Think about your fishing. What are you trying to remove, the fish or the water? You don't care about the water. You don't care about you care about the fish. So as long as you didn't do an action after the fish is out of the water, which moved the water about, which shook the water off the net, then we say the water was not nekar. It's kavaldik. However, v'imniya, which is the presumption, then huchshiru. That's it. No, you shake off the net. You don't want to. Once you don't want to, you're moving the water about. You're getting rid of the water. These waters are mayim that are nekru beratzin. We also say that you want for the fish to be wet. It also looks fresh. And the why? Because the way of the world is that when you bring a fish up in a net, you will shake out the net. Certain things are so common that they lose their nemanis. So if you know that there's a chaver and he went fishing and you knew that he was trying to keep the levels of tada, which is the definition of a chaver, then you can say it's tohay. Halacha dal. Kol atzir, all fish brine becheskas muchshar. Why is that? Now, guys, fish brine by itself is just fish brine. Fish is not, but you people would add water in the fish brine. So if you have fish, that's tahar, because the chaver was the one that did the fishing, and then you added a little bit of water, harei hakoil mashkam. It's amazing. All of it now will have the category of one of the 7 liquids because of even a minute amount of mayim, umachshir. Now it will be considered water. So aleph, it could be machshir, and it could acquire tumas mashkin, and lefika cheskasei tamei. As we began on halacha dalet, kol atzir b'cheskas muchshar. People ask, hold on, there's no water in it. No, it's common for you to add a little bit of water in it. Now, if it's not water, by water, only a little bit renders halachically the fish brine into halachic water. But if there is no water in it, yes, you added wine, or you added oil, honey, or you added milk. Stam lohoyer, that today we don't mix, right, fish and milk. But even today, you're going to have laksh and cheese. Let's not get into it right now. So here they would add milk in the fish brine. Here you go after the majority. If the majority is still fish brine, it's not called a mashkin. So it's not machshir, and it's not mistamen. Any other meipedois in mashkin. The rule is also this rule of rechol nachal reif. However, nisarbu b'mayim kol shein. Something unique about water. Hadei hakol mashke. Remember that rule now. No, it's water has a lot more koyach than any other of the 6. And if it's called mashke, then umestame tumas mashkin and umachshir. Again, lohoyer in the Seder, that in the Rambam, in this same halacha, we spoke before about water, kol shein, in the tzir. The Rambam first said machshir umestame, and at the end he switches the order. And obviously, there's a reason. Now, v'tzir chagovim tameim, brine from unkosher locusts, einoi machshir, never, but yes, mistame tumas mashkin. Why? I have no idea. Again, Hashem should enlighten us. So the din is, mashikoi b'mayim. Here is the gavaldik echad, that we could, water is the only one of the liquids that if it is tamei, you can make it tar by doing hashaka, as we spoke out many times. So we can presume we can make hashaka and it's done. Why? So then it has a halach of mayim. Even though when it came to a ding of mashke or a machshir, you only need kol shehein. But here, in order for you to be able to take it to the mikvah, to be metayed, it has to have roiv. So if there is taka roiv tzir mayim mayim etalam mikvah, if rubai melech shel dagin, then ene mekabel stuma, and we will then say that the mayim sheba batlu b'miyuta. Now, how does that reconcile with the Rambam writing before that sir tor shenav al techamayim kol shem hakol mashke? Here, the Rambam is speaking about kasha. I don't know how to reconcile that. Okay, so again, here the Rambam is saying that if roiv, it's going to be worked the mikvah. If it's not roiv mayim, then the mayim is batal b'miyut, so you don't have a problem. However, when did you say this miman of shach? Litfol behemas hapas. If you want to use this brine to dip right into it, but if you want to put it, which means you're not going to add water later to it, but if you're going to put it into a pot, which means there's going to be water in the pot, so now there's a concept of matzah minismina, even they are. This is a classic concept in kashrus, in whoever's learning smicha is going to learn about it. You know, if you have a minority mayim and you made hashaka, the hashaka was not effective. Elamah was not needed. And you are allowed to have it. It's not metame. But it's not that there's no water in there. The moment other waters are added, now we say the original water is reawakened. That water that was tame was really never tahared. It was not transformed. It was just suppressed. Now it's reawakened. And the nimtzu, now you're going to have roiv mayim tameim, because shahamiyot shahai batzir did not become Torah b'mikvah. It did not create a problem that Rambam wrote before because it was batal b'miyuta. But now it's no longer batal. So when could you buy seed from an Amma Aretz and take it to the mikvah with the miman of shach if you're not going to put it into a pot? Produce, fruits. Even if the seller is a guy, unlike grains, here you have to know that it was mukhshar. And let's go to what is that? Halacha zayin ha'oig. So oig is a certain type of berry. Because it was very common that people would wet it with water. Now that's sticky. Anything that was wetted with water is going to be mukhshar. And we began in this chapter by saying if anything is becheskas mukhshar, it's becheskas tameh. Chein, kol hakishuyin, all zucchini, all diluyan squash, v'hataluyois, bigimi, al pischi chanuyis, and all vegetables that are hung by reeds over the entrances of stores, which means people are coming and going and they're touching the vegetables the whole time. The cheskas aleph mukhsharim, to make them look attractive, and two, to me, because everyone touches them. Halachet. Kol hakosu b'toyron. Ubedivrei Kabbalah, mehilchos atumas v'taros. Whenever you read in the Torah, whenever you read in the Nach, whenever we learn about Torah Shabbat Peh, we are really initially it's focused on Einoi Elul Ingen Mikdash Ukadashov. Either it's about temple, kachim, or trumais, or ma'aser sheni. Yeah, ma'aser sheni is the least susceptible, but ma'aser sheni also we want to maintain and eat it in Yerushalayim in a state of tahara. Sharei hizir es hatamei milikonis lamigdash, as well as a tamei was forewarned to eat kodesh, truma, or to eat truma, or to eat ma'aser, while that person betuma. And by the way, whether it's the person, whether it's the food. Aval, however, by Torah law, if it's chulin, ein bohem isur klal. Elam mutar lechol chulin tameim. A person is allowed to eat chulin that are tamei. A person is allowed to drink mashkin that are tamei. It says in the Torah, v'habasar asher yiga, right? B'chol tamei lo yei achel. Fakert. That pasuk in Tzav is speaking about kachim. So fakert, that's the source. That kachim should not be eaten. That implies by title law, the whole parsha Tzav is about kach. In Cain, why do we have to have this rishon shabachol and tamei and basheni pasal if we don't care? So the answer is the reason why we have to count the rishon and sheni by chul and loishiya asur bachila, not to tell you can't eat it by title law, ella lim lois v'meno, but in order to count from it when it comes to truma and kodesh. In other words, if I have chul and that sheni, I can eat it, but if that touches truma, it's going to passel the truma. If that touches kodesh, it's going to be metama the kodesh. Makes it into a shlish. If it touches Shel Kodesh, it makes it not only itself tummy, but it's tummy on a level that it can still impart tuma to its like, because Kodesh can become even Aravi. Timan Basan Shlishi Kamashayanu. If someone eats oichel sheni shel chulin, now that we have this rabbinic sul gevia, like remember, if you eat a half a pras, which is an egg and a half, but pras, then the person becomes tamei midrabanan. On what level? On a sheni. Again, he did nothing wrong, but he needs to know that, because now if or she touches truma, they'll make it into a shlishi, which is called psal. So first of all, just to make that clear, halacha 9. Just like by Torah law, there's no problem. You are allowed to eat chulin tameim and to drink chulin that are tameim. You are allowed to purposefully make chulin tamei. Now, guys, that Rambam adds a very important nuance. If you have tevel, don't make that into tumah. Because if you're going to be matama tevel, then when you will separate the truma, you're going to have truma that's tameim. We don't want that. But if it's already all separated, lechatchila, you can make a tummy. Person can touch anything that's tummy. Uli stame b'hen. Shahadei he said our kasuv only b'nei aharon and the nazir that they should not become tummy through a mace. So first of all, we infer from that michlal shekol ha'amutarim. And furthermore, even kohanim and nazirim, their isur is only to make mace. Mutarim listami b'shar tumas. Only not tumas mace. Now, all of that is like an intro. In Yiddish, you say, aber, however, it's not so simple. So first of all, halacha yud, kol Yisrael, musarim liyas toheidim b'chol regel. All the Yidden are commanded, they are forewarned to remain in a state of ritual tara during all of the 3 Yomim Tovim. But Hashem tells us to go to the Beis HaMikdash to see and to be seen. The Torah tells us we may not enter the Beis HaMikdash betumah. So 1 second. We have to be prepared. Likanis b'Mikdash. We also have the mitzvahs, right? Re'iyah, oilas re'iyah, shalmei chagiga, etc. And we have to eat kosher. In Parsha Shemini, now the Rambam says Gamaldik, indeed, don't touch an avela, which means don't become a rishon. Indeed, that's for every Jew. Benegel bilvad. And even there, if a person became tamei, they're not chayiv malchus. Interestingly, but still, you have to be careful to go into the Beis Hamikdash. But the Rambam goes back. We don't have any mitzvah at all biblically, a negative mitzvah, a prohibition, a forewarning not to become tamei. Halacha Yudal. When the Torah says hatamei v'hator yachtov, which means that a tamei and a tor are allowed to eat out of the same plate. In other words, if I'm going to eat with the tamei, I will become tamei, or I might become tamei. That's the whole point. We don't care. The Rambam writes, before he goes on to the Prushim and to the people that took upon themselves to live with a higher standard, the Rambam says there is another area of Tum and Tara where we may not eat out of the same plate. Husband and a wife may not eat out of the same plate while the woman is in Ida, nor may he drink out of her same cup, nor she may not directly pour to him his cup, as we have learned in all of these Isuri Nidam. Also, in these cases, it's not because they may become tummy. That's another issue. That's because of what we call Hergel Averam. In other words, if they are close, and if they're going to eat together, Shema Yivoil. But as far as imparting of Tumah is concerned, there is absolutely no worry. And now that Rambam will conclude this entire series of Echolin, concluding Perek Tezayin with Halacha Yud Beis, that as we spoke, and a person is allowed to drink mashkin tameim, even though midrabanan they'll become tamei. Nevertheless, Hasidim Arishonim hoya oichlin chuleim as betara and v'nizarin min hatuma is kulan kol yemeim. And now that we're already deep into Sefer Tara, the only way you can keep yourself pure is by having a physical separation from many people and many items and many foods. Because as we had just in this chapter, things that you buy from an Amma Aretz in many cases are becheskas muksharim, and therefore then becheskas tameim. And that is why they're called the Perushim. The word Parush means someone who's separated. Not emotionally separated, God forbid. Not caring, God forbid, but physically there was a separation. The Davar Zeh is something good. Kedushi Yeserihi. The Derech Hasidus. That what? Sheyia Nivdel Adam upoiresh min ha'am v'lo yiga bohen v'lo yoichal v'yishteiman. And this is something that will lead into other even greater things. Shaperishus midivel de Taras Aguf. And Taras Aguf also means Memaisa Marayim. Because when you make such a boundary, you end up staying away from people that are not Chavedim like you. So we are influenced by our surroundings. And this Taras Aguf, Mevila de Kedushas HaNefesh, not only will we refrain from not good activities, we're going to refrain from not good ideas. Min Deis Harois. And Kedushas HaNefesh, Goy Remes, it will cause us Lidamos Bashchina to resemble more the Shechina itself. Shnemer, as it says, and this is mamish towards the ends of Parashat Shmini, that v'hiskadishtem v'yisem kedoshim ki kodosh ani Hashem mikadishchem. How beautiful! And with this we say Berich Rachmana Desayim and a huge Mazel Tov. I know that Tumas Eicholin was not so pashit. Hashem should help us go back and review it properly and to tie up the loose ends. Like even today's chapter, I shared, like, is mashkin the miyuton, is it machshir or matame, or is it batal, b'chulei? And let's now move on to Hilchos Kelim. As always, Pasha, today it's going to be an easy class because the beginning, I'm telling you, the beginning for me at least is very easy and it's very important. Everything is important, of course, but you have the big rules. So Perek Aleph of Hilchos Kelim is going to begin, and this is important. The Rambam tells us that there are 7 different types of Kelim. And we'll see what we mean by that. And we'll see that, and all of them are Makabel Tumah Min HaTorah, but we categorize them into 7 groups because every group doesn't follow exactly all of the same rules. Every group has its own rules in certain nuances. One key detail regarding any keli, regarding a receptacle is, does it have a base kibble? Does it have actually a receptacle? A receptacle doesn't have to be something that can contain a large amount of food or liquid, but it means like, an indentation in which something could be held. Contrast to many utensils are flat. Now, not so quick. We're not saying that flatware cannot become tummy, but we will see, depending which of the 7 of categories of kelim we are talking about, some of them we will differentiate whether it has what we call a base kibble or a toich, means the same thing. Base kibble, something that can hold a receptacle or an inside, or whether it's pshutim, pshute, or whether it's flat, they'll have different rules. We're going to also have just one detail in this intro. There's a cloud that anything that's connected to the ground cannot become tummy because it's karka. Karka does not become tummy, and when something is connected to the ground, it doesn't become tummy. One big exception regarding kalim is going to be an oven. Now, I'm not saying that all of the ovens in the times of Chazal were connected to the ground. Many of them were not. But you should just know that an oven, even when the oven is physically connected to the house, connected to the ground, the Torah clearly speaks about the psukim, how a tanur, an oven, remains a halachic keli that's susceptible to becoming tamei, but you have to know the other rules. If it's made out of earthenware, we're going to go through this first Perek, all of the big rules of how kelim become tamei, beginning with the 7 types of kelim. Let's begin with the header. Hilchos Kelim, the Rambam says, Inyan elu halachos is leida kelim shemekablim tuma b'chol elu hatumais. No, we're not going to go into the levels of tumah. That's something that we learned before. Midoraisa, keli can become tummy only from an av, right? We learned that midrabanan, even a rishon can make a keli tummy, etc. We're just going to learn about it. It has to be a halachic keli. The kelim she'en mistamin. Certain kelim are not going to be, cannot acquire tumah at all. And the ketzav mistamin a kelim. How do they become tummy? How do they impart tumah? That's going to be the topic of the Hilchos Kelim. This is the second to last series of halachos in Sefer Torah. Bir Inyan Zeh will be in the subsequent Perakim. God willing, this entire week we will be living with Hilchos Kelim. Perek Rishon. Perek Rishon, my friends, has 13 halachos. This is it. Shiva Minei Kelim. You have 7 types of kelim. Now, I know that sometimes a keli means a utensil. Just to make it clear, the word keli is a bigger word than utensil. As we'll see, garments are also included in the word keli. Okay? So there are 7 types of kelim. All of the 7, that they are susceptible to tumah, the Elohei. Number 1, clothes. Remember. Number 2, sakin. Now, sakin has a unique category, as we'll learn later. So you're speaking about articles that are made out of any type of very coarse fiber. And the Rambam here in this chapter is going to go into details about the sakin. Klei oir doesn't only mean clothing. Any utensil that is made out of leather utensils. Klei etzim are bone utensils. Klei matchos are metal utensils. Included in that will be silver, gold, tin, from the most expensive to the least expensive, mineral matchos. Then we have klei eitz, kelim that are made out of wood, and the 7th is klei cheres, earthenware. Earthenware doesn't mean just the earth, but it means that the earth was fired up in a kiln, and that's called the klei cheres. Now, where do we know that all 7 of them generally are shayach to the dinam of Tumah? So the Rambam quotes psukim for all of it. It says, and he begins with the pasuk in Shmini, Mikol kli eitz, oy beged, oy oir, oy sak. Eitz, beged, oir, sak. So far we have 4, right? 4 out of the 7. Regarding matchos, which is number 5, now we're going to Pashas Matois, fight a Muhammad against Midian. The Torah says, Ach es hazov es hakesev. In that context, we're speaking about being metahered. Even though the Torah is speaking about 2 things in Matos, both taking out the tam that's nivla in the kelim, but you also have the concept of being metahered from tuma. Bechlei cheres, right? That's number 6. It says, and now we're going back to Parsha Shmini, v'chol kli cheres asher yipol mehem el toichai. As we keep on learning that it only acquires tumah if the source of tumah goes to the inner part, into the base kibble of the cheres. Another detail that once a kli cheres becomes tumah, you can't even take it to the mikveh. So far we have 6 out of the 7. Guys, whoever's holding their heads on a held cup, which one didn't yet? Which one is missing as a source? We don't yet have the klei etzim, bones. Halacha beis. When it says in the Torah, v'chol ma'aseizim, the word v'chol is extra. The Torah could have written u'ma'aseizim av'chol, the rabbis kelim that are made also even from the karnaim, from the teflaim, and from the atzomois of the izim. Guys, here we are beginning bones, and now it's not only from izim, even though the Torah says ma'aseizim, it's not just about goats. U'adin, not the fish, not the birds, but goats meaning a land animal. Domesticated, non-domesticated. Aval, however, kelim hasuyim atzmai both kelim that are made out of bones of a bird, of a fowl, einon mikabel and tuma chutz mikelim hasuyim from the knaf, from the wings of an osniya. An osniya, Kevin will put up a picture. There we go. It's called an osprey bilvad. And ubeitzas hanaam is hametzupa. If you have an ostrich egg that is actually coated, making it into something strong, hoyel behem doimim latzam. These are the only 2 that they are very similar to bones of land animals. Therefore, mekamlan tuma kichlei etzem. And the Rambam adds, even though indeed that's the way it is, but the kar of the einai, that when it comes to the last 2, right, bones that are made out of the wings of the osniya, and kelim that are made out of the eggs of an ostrich, that they are only tamei midivrei sofrim. Okay, so at least by the bones, we put a shtickle limit, and now the Rambam quoted sources from all 7. Now let's go like this. Kelim asuyim, if they're made from atzmois chaya shebayom, sea animals, or from the hide, the leather, the skin of any creature of the sea, are completely tahidim. Because of the big rule, this is not the first time we learned it, but here we go again. Kol shemayam. Anything, everything from the sea tar, not tuma, not even tumas mitzvahs. There's a certain type of wool that grows from the sea, a certain type of seaweed. It's not a fish. It's lachatchila was not a living creature. No, it comes from the sea. It's not going to become tummy. Because it says oy beged oy or. The Torah juxtaposes the two. Ma beged is min hagodel ba'aretz. So when the Torah speaks about ha'oid, it af min hagodel ba'aretz. Now, what happens if you have a mixture? Chibed min hagodel bayam im hagodel ba'aretz. So here we say even if they are connected only by a thread, even if they are connected only by its fringe, by its end, oy meshicha. If, and that we learned in Hilchos Paraduma, if they will be considered one garment, that if a source of Tuma touched one, the other one will be Tame equal, because it's one garment. So then we say, Hakom Makabel Tuma. Hakom Makabel Tuma. Gevaldik. In other words, this is the only scenario where something that is made out of that which comes from the sea will become tamei because it's connected to a normal garment. It's therefore halachically part of that garment, and then it can be become tum. Halacha daled. Yeroli, the Rambam says again, it appears to me that means that the Rambam, there's no clear source in the Torah Shabbat Peh up until the Rambam, shahakelim that are made meha'oiv ha'oiv, ein mekablum tuma, just like the bones of a bird, other than those exceptions, are not makabel tumah. Ve'im timer, hold on. One might think that haloi hu kasher lichtav alav tefillin k'ma k'gad ka'oid behema b'chayam, and one might erroneously think that just like we do compare the leather, the hide, the skin of a bird to the skin of a behema b'chayam, as far as dinim of writing tefillin, mezuzahs are concerned. So maybe they are also similar as far as the dinim of Tum and Tar are concerned. The Rambam says absolutely not. I'll prove to you why not. Because really, if not for a side reason, even the Oid Hadog, which clearly ain't a Makabel Tuma, if not for the fact that there's a certain stench inside the hide of a fish, no matter how much you work on it, no matter how much you process it, it always remains there. And that's the only reason why you can't use it for stam. Is a haraya that it doesn't go on the same track. Now that we mentioned the 7, now let's go into other items that might be married to, connected to, a child to these like ovens. How do you view glassware? Says the Rambam, because they're not one of the 7. Why is that? Since they begin from the sand, like lecheres, so midrabanan they are like lecheres. Now, if one would stop over here, what would one think? Lecheres can only become tamei if the source of tumah goes to the inside. By glass, we don't say that because glass is transparent. Outside and inside look the same. So it becomes even more chamur. In other words, the insides can be seen like they're outside. On one hand, there's a leniency that if it only enters the airspace, klicheres acquires tumah. By glass, no. So it's more lenient, but it's more chamur. How is it more chamur? Because if the source of tama actually touches it, even migabon, even from the outside. So in that, they are similar to a clay matchois. So that's a crossbreed. Now, another detail, if you have flat glass utensils, you have a board made out of glass, so they're like they're not going to become tummy at all. Only if they have mikableim, like we mentioned in the intro, only if they have a base kibble. Why? Like a klecheres. Another din, ve'ein lehem tana b'mikvah. Also, if it becomes tamei, like a klecheres, it cannot be tahor. Ve'ein shorif and aleim truma v'kachim. Since the whole tumah is only midrabanan, don't forget. So if it becomes tamei and imparts tumah, truma and kachim won't be burnt. Even though we did learn that there are 6 derabanans, right, where you're going to still be soidif, it's not one of them. Halacha vav. Clay galalim, utensils made out of animal dung. Clay avonim, any utensil made out of stone. Clay adama, made out of earth prior to it being fired up in a kiln. La oilam ta'idim. Ve'ena mekablan tuma. Not tumas midras, not midivrei Torah, not midivrei soifrim. Whether they are flatware, even if they have a mikableim, even if they have a container, if they have a beis kibul, a machayim. And indeed, whenever we wanted to keep, like we learned, the coin that was going to be shechting the paraduma, v'chulei, right? When we quarantined them, what did we also learn? That in his chamber, they would only have klei avonim, just to make sure that it's not shaykh for him to become tamei. Halacha 7. Peel, if you have a large animal, then elephant, Shabala Hutzim, he swallowed thin branches, and now it went out of his body, right from behind. And now one fashioned utensils out of it. So now what's the suffix? Do they have the status of clay galalim, gavaldi, or they still have a status of a clay eitz? Clay galalim never become tamei. Clay eitz, as we'll see, becomes tamei, following the rules of clay eitz. So when do we have this doubt? I don't know what Kevin is putting up here. When do we have? Okay, I got it.
Made from elephant dung.
Got it. Shkoyach, clay galalim. When do we have this doubt? Only because the elephant swallowed non-kalim. It swallowed branches. But if there was already a basket, there was already a kalim that already became tummy, that was swallowed by an elephant, and it worked its way through the digestive tract, and it came out, so to say, intact. In other words, there was no fundamental change. So now there's no doubt. Now it's tummy. Harei b'tumas. Halach 8. Pshutei klei cheres. Moving on to the next category. You have a earthenware utensil, but it's flat. Now, the example that Rambam gives us a menorah. Now, I would always think that a lamp, you're kidding, you got to put oil in the lamp. So I don't know how it means pshutei klei cheres. Maybe they would have just these flabs of earthenware, get flat, and they would put a wax candle on it. They put it on it, so when it comes to the bottom, right, you don't want to put it on a wooden table because then it can catch fire. Cheres doesn't burn, right? Or when we're speaking about flatware, a chair is flat, a table is flat. Or if they are all made out of cheres, the chayotze behen. Guys, remember this: if it's flat, see, here's where we have to chazer. All of the 7 categories. Where don't we make a difference between pshutayim, kibleim, and when do we make? Here we make a difference. Not even tumas midras, it's always a standalone. Not medivrei Torah, not even medivrei soifrim, because the Torah writes regarding the earthenware utensil, asher yipol mehem el toicha yitma. So the Torah we learn from that. Kol sheyesh lo toich. Inside. Only then is it shaykh for it to be mekabel tuma, which means if it doesn't have a toich, if it doesn't have a receptacle because it's flat, then toich. Halacha 9, klimatchois. When it comes to metal kalim, here mamish, no difference whether they are flat like a knife, or whether you have a scissors, or whether it's a metal utensil that has a base kibul, right? A mikableim, like pots. The kumaisim or kettles, hakoil, mikabel, and tuma, we don't differentiate biblically. Shenamar, as it says in Parshas Matos, called davar ashiyava ba'esh, and that is bein mikabel, bein pashut, afilu teva. Another chumrah that we find unique by metal. When you have a large chest, or you have a large drawer, or you have any large keli, the chayotze behem, which is all made out of metal. Even if it's large enough to hold 40 saw of liquid or more. Guys, we learned this together. If you remember, if this would have been made out of wood, this is called clay eitz ha'asuyin l'nachas, which is very common. Right? In our homes, you have these big wooden closets. Then we say, no, it's not mekabel tuma. By metal, there's no such a difference. Or more, mekabel and tuma. Shenemar kol davar ashiyava b'eish. So guys, remember, metal, it's very susceptible. Pshutim, ekableim, little, huge. Halacha yud. Now let's contrast clay eitz and clay yard and clay etzim. Now like this. Again, we already limited the clay etzim. We're speaking about bones of either behemoths or chayes. Mekableim, if they have a receptacle, like if you made a areva, if you made a kneading trough, right? It has it's a bowl. Or vahachemes, you have a drinking pouch. He's giving an example of a clay oil that people used to have. It was for a skin pouch. The chayoytze behen, they are mekabel tuma midivrei Torah, like the Rambam began in this chapter. We had psukim for all of this. Avol, however, shu tehen kalim that are made out of wood, but they're flat, like luchais, right? Vahakisei, v'ha'oil she'oichlin aleim chayoytze behem. It's very common. Ein mekabel tuma ela midivrei Torah. You have to remember this. So here, like this, midoiraisa, by these three. Kli'etz, kliyot, kliyetz. I'm talking to myself. Midoiraisa, we differentiate. Midoiraisa, pshutim won't be mekabel tuma. Midrabanan, it will be. Klicheres, we learned, pshute klicheres is not mekabel tuma, not even midrabanan. Okay. Here, yes, Shenemeras, it says, mikol kli'etz, oibega the oirisak. So just like a sack, by definition, is something sheyesh lebeis kibul. So the other eights, the other items mentioned together, af koil sheyesh lebeis kibul, and uchlei etzem uchlei eitz is the same. So midoiraisa they're not makabel tuma. That even midrabanan there is a tumas tumas shuteim medivrei soifrim. Guys, halkop. That's only when it comes to all other tumas. Aside of Tumas Midras, now you'll appreciate why the Rambam always speaks out separately Tumas Midras, because here we make a difference. Avol b'midras hazav v'chaveirav, even though it's pshutim, they are mekabel tuma min ha'toira, because when the Torah says kol hamishkav, anything asher yishkav, which means kol ha'asil mishkav oilamenkav k'moshe b'yarnu, even if it's made out of wood, even if it's made out of hide. I think hide was very common. Even if it's made out of bone. And by the way, it's not stam tummy. It's tummy on the level of an av. But the Rambam is not going into the level of tumah. Just the concept that it's mekabel tumah midayrais. Now, so we did learn before that when that klei zechuches is like cheres to a certain degree. We just said over here that that klei cheres is not mekabel tumas midras. Not even the Drabanan. Here, klei zechuchis will not be like cheres. It would be like matches, at least with the Drabanan. If it was made to be laid on, now what type of glass was made to be laid on, I don't know. But then mistami midras midivrei halacha yudalf koil shahu aruk. Any article that is woven, whether it's woven mitzemer from wool or from pishtan, which is linen, which is the main two fibers. Whether it's woven from cannabis, that's a minig in our lay, everything is made out of cannabis, or meshi, or from silk, or anything else that grows on the land. That's important because we just said that things that grow in the sea have a midorais the din of a yam, krol shabayam star. That's called a beged le'inyan tumah. And also even felt, which means it's not woven together. As far as dine, tum, and tar are concerned, and we spoke out of we mentioned we're going to speak a halacha yud beis. Like it's a sak is a separate category. How is it a separate category? Because it's made out of a very coarse fiber. Let's go. It's referring to here that are braided like a chain. Or even if you are using coarse hair like the hair of a goat, even if you're weaving it like a garment, you're not making it chain-like, it's still going to be called a sak. Whether you made it out of goat's hair, whether you made it out of camel's hair, whether you made it from the tail of a horse, whether you made it from the tail of a cow, all of this is considered coarse, and therefore it's in the category of a sak. Whether they are woven like the martzupim, like the sacks, or like we mentioned, whether they are braided like the chavok, shal chamor, like the band for donkeys. Both, in other words, it's not about how it's made, it's about the fibers being coarse. What fibers are called coarse, like we mentioned? So if goats, camels, horse, and cow, and the like. Now, now it's a beged. If you made it into a beged, you made it into a beged. I don't care if you made it like a chain or if you wove it. But what happens if you have just a rope? Stam a rope. Is a rope a beged? So he says, ropes, meshichai strands, hashazurim that are spun, whether they're spun min haseyar, whether they're spun from something coarse, which is goat's hair, whether they're spun even from wool or linen. We're not talking about a thread. We're speaking about a rope. The din is einan mekablin tuma b'fnei atzman. Now, if it's very important, b'fnei atzman means if you made it part of an implement. Many times you're going to have, let's say, you're going to have a pot. I mean, today everything is made. You have a handle. Many times that rope handles. If it's connected to another keli, it becomes part of that keli. If it's a rope by itself, that's b'fnei atzman. It's never makabel tuma. And this chapter's final halacha yud gimel, kol hakelim, that are made either from goima, it's a certain type of reed, or from the arava, from willow branches, or from kanim, from bulrushes, or from the branches, mikapis tamarim, from date trees, or umin ha'olim, from any leaves, or from any branches, or from any klipe ilonois, from the bark of any trees, or from a certain type of chaylev grass. And the Rambam is giving examples of what then in his times were made out of the above, kigoyin hakefifos, like small baskets, bataras kolin, and large baskets, hamachalotzois, and rugs. Not the Persian rugs. We're talking about rugs that are made out of reeds, bahamapotzois, and mats. Very important. Since they are all made from that which grows from soimeach, hakol bechlal klei ha'etz. And what did we learn above, my friend? Just for example, that pshute klei eitz minatoid is not makabel tuma. B'drabanan it is. Right. Sha'akol gadol min ha'aretz ka'etz. Another thing. Echad kli cheres. Right. Same laws that govern klei cheres. The echad klei nesed l'chol davar. Anything that's made out of nesed. Nesed is sandstone. Kol kli ha'asur mi ha'afer min ha'afer is any keli that's made somehow from earth or from sand. And later the key is, don't forget, klei adama is b'chlal not mekabel tuma, not even midrabanan. Never. But if it was then burnt up in a kifshan, all of that is called klei cheres. How great is that? So now we went through all of the seven. We outlined generally how each one has its own detailed laws. The Rambam concludes regarding a classic earthen utensil known as an oven. Now they had tanur, kirayin, and kupach, if you remember. So the oven is what we know of. The kirayin and the kupach is some sort of stove or range that served both as an oven. But remember, the kinayim was an oven whose opening was on the top, not on the side. It was large enough also to put two pots on the top. The kupach, same idea, smaller. And the tanur is, all these pictures, you have these rounded, dome-like ovens. All of them. The chayoytze behen misha'or habinyonois. The chiddush is that as long as they were made either for people to bake in them or to cook on them, even if they are built into the ground, even if they are affixed to the wall, that's a very big klal. If it's called a tanur, hakol mekabel tumam din toira. B'chiddush, the Torah normally says anything that's connected to the ground is not. It is. And v'tumas klei cheres, these things were made out of earthenware, arshava. And by the way, the reason for that is because you have in Parsha Shmini, the Torah says the words tanur v'kirayim yutatz. Yutatz means you got to smash it. That's another detail, that once a klei cheres becomes tameh, you cannot be metayed it. You have to break it. The fact that the Torah says tanur v'kirayim yutatz, even though the norm, especially by a tanur, it's not a range, it's not a movable, it's a fixed. From there we learn that if it's called a tanur, it's always going to be susceptible to tumah like any other klei cheres. You have to go from inside to the inside, but it can become tameh. My fellow Yidden, now we are moving on to today's third chapter, which is Perek Sheni of Hilchos Kelim. Now that we describe the 7 Shiva Kelim Shemakablim Tumah in our Torah, the next step is there a minimum size? Is there a minimum size or not? Right, especially when you speak about the base kibul. Another thing is, even though we mentioned the 7 general categories, we're going to learn how the substance of the material will make a difference. And this whole concept of a base kibul, which concerning many of the 7, we are machalek, at least in Menatoida, we're going to speak more details about the halachic definition of a base kibul. Perek Sheni has 8 halachas. Gavaldik. Halacha Aleph. I don't compare to yesterday's learning. This is so easy. Says the Rambam. When you make a receptacle, means I don't care how little it is. any type of receptacle. Like we don't say, it has to be something large enough to hold. No. Amazing. The ain lekli kibul shir. Now, substance will be important. What do I mean by substance? For who sheyaseh davar shel kayama. It has to be made from a lasting substance. Something lasting means not only that the material will last, more than that, that the receptacle part in it will last, as the Rambam will explain beautifully. She'efshar sheyamid, for example, ha'oisa kli min ha'oid hamatzah. We call a matzah, a skinny little matzah. Leather that's very skinny was many times called a matzah, and especially the ones that were not processed at all, which is very, you would argue, flimsy, or even paper. Now, I don't think that the paper in the times of Chazal and at the times of the Rambam was as thin as our paper. But the Rambam is just giving you examples of materials that are very shvach. Or afalpi, that the paper per se is not makabel tuma, but if you made it into a receptacle, that means if there's a little bit of an indentation in the paper, that's called a base kibble. And by the way, we learned in the previous chapter that anything that comes from that which grows, just to know, a paper will be called clay eights, right? Paper comes from wood, not the paper that Kevin showed in the last year, Ayin Sham, but normal paper comes from trees. Imagine the peel of a pomegranate. It's very shvach. It's very unsubstantial. Or an egois, at least that I get better of aloin, acorns. That Rambam writes that even if the reason why there's a kibble in it, there's a base kibble, it was carved out. It was by tenoikos. And why did they do it? They wanted to measure earth. They're playing. In other words, the function is not for something serious. Lamid behema offer. They're playing with the sand. They want to use a certain amount of sand. Right? You're making scales. And it doesn't matter for what purpose. That's a big thing. Now, the Rambam is also adding another nuance. The nuance is that even if the base kibble was made by a tinoik, normally a tinoik, forget about a cotton. He has no das at all. Doesn't matter. Halachically, their actions are of significance. Even though they don't have machshava. And unlike what we learned in the previous Tumas Eichalin, it was all about hachshara b'machshava. No, here we don't need machshava. We just need it has a base kibble. How great is it? When we speak about making a keli, mach a keli in Hasidic terminology, doesn't matter who's making it. Made a keli. Now there is a limit. There has to be some sort of substance. It has to be lasting on some level. If you make a keli out of a turnip, lefis, or from an esvik, it mamish won't last. Or you make it from the peel of a squash, hayavation, and you want to use it as a measuring utensil. The chol chayotze behem, here we say they're completely tehoidim. However you defined in halacha zman muad, that will be a source. These items are considered, even paper, imagine, that's good, and the other ones are not. Now, according to many, the Rambam in halacha beis is going to be speaking about a keli that has in it a clay kibble for swindling purposes, for non-kosher purposes. For example, Knei Moisnayim, you have this horizontal rod, right, that people make a scale out of it. If you think about it for a second, you have this rod, right? And you're going to hang out of it, a pan here and a pan here. So these ganavim, what did they do? They would hollow out in one side a hole. And whenever they wanted one side to go lower than the other, unbeknownst to the customer, they would put some heavy metal in it. So it has a clay kibble, and it's made for the purpose of tricking someone, God forbid. Or bahamachat. Bahamachat is a leveling rod. So let's say you're selling a product. So you have these standard measure kalim, you fill it up, but the guy is only paying for that which fits in it. So they would have this rod that they would pass over. They would pass over the top, and it would take out anything that's going above it. So they would also hollow out this rod, and they would make it heavier, or they would make it a little bit indented in order for when they pass it over the keli, for it to push out and steal a little bit from the customer, right? Or you have a asel. You have a peddler pole. What's the peddler's pole? I'm just explaining all of this in a way that even though it's done for a very non-kosher purpose. So imagine you're a peddler. You're going to sell merchandise. You're going to people's homes, and it's not a store. Take that picture away. We're going to something else now, and people give you money. You know what these Ganavim did? They had in their poles, they had in their walking staffs, they had hidden holes. So imagine you are giving the seller a few coins. He's hiding it in his pole. It like disappeared. And he's saying, no, you didn't pay me yet. The guy says, I paid you. He says, no, where's the money? The point is, these are all kalim that had receptacles, but they were made for very non-kosher purposes. That's called, again, that's the Esel Shivakila Mois. Or Ukana Shal Eitz Sheyesh Bebeis Kibul Mayim. Like many people would walk around and they would say, oh, I don't even have water to drink. And really they had water in their walking sticks. Or a makal, other sticks, Sheyesh Beis Kibul Mezuzah. And again, either that's for Shemitah. By the way, there's no mitzvah of putting a mezuzah in your walking stick. So here it's either you're putting it, it's like L'Shem Shemitah Kameya, or also just to make it in the same context of swindlers. A guy wants to show that he's very frum. So he's walking around and he has a mezuzah stuck into a pole. You might think it's not significant because you don't have to put a mezuzah in your walking staff. Oi, Make Margolis. People would make holes in their walking sticks to put precious stones. Pearls, why? Not to pay taxes. It's all about the utensils they're wood, they're flat, or the metal, and they're flat, by wood especially, but it's not flat, but it was done for a bad reason. So now we're going away from swindling. Here it's normal. In other words, that you want to sharpen, you're using a wooden sharpener, and somehow if it was oiled, it would do a better job. So, it's not really to hold the oil. It's in order for there to be oil there when it's doing its purpose. Or veluach pinkas, sheyesh bebeis kibul. This is very common, writing tablets. So how would they write? Today we have paper, which is very inexpensive. They would have tablets. Around the tablet, there would be a little rim in which you can pour wax. And then you would carve out in the wax what you need to do. And the way you would erase it is you would melt the wax. So it's flat, but it's not mamish flat because you didn't want the wax to fall over the sides. So all of these things have some sort of base kibble. We established in Halacha Aleph, I don't care how little the base kibble is. That's the beauty. Shaiva v'chol el chayetzabahem afapi, that otherwise they would be pshute kleyates. And we learned in the previous chapter pshute kleyates middoy raisas not makabel tumam. Other than Tumas Midras, Hoyel Yesh when base kibble kol shu mekabel and Tuma din toiram. It's not pshute kleyates. Now, the ain't coming in a toiram. Ella base kibble levadoy sheyesh bahem, and the hamishamesh as base kibble nishara keli shebase kibble tzarich. Now, some of these utensils were very large, and the base kibble was only in a little part of it. The Rambam wants you to know, don't think that since any part of this wood had in it any type of receptacle, all of it is considered a receptacle made out of wood. No. Sometimes you would have part of the keli for which the receptacle has no purpose. It doesn't, this doesn't serve that, the other doesn't serve the other. In those cases, that part of the keli remains in the status of pshute kleyates, even though it's the same keli. Anything that's not necessary. However, don't forget, we learned in the previous chapter that pshute kleyates is tamim midrabanan. Okay. Now, halacha gimel, base kibul hasi limal loisai, any receptacle that was made with the intent for it to be filled, completely filled, as we'll give an example. So now there's a receptacle, but it's going to be used and therefore not available, is also not called a base kibul. For example, not a base kibble like a cup. You fill it with water. No. Bikashal eitz shechoitin by base kibble. You have a block of wood, and what you're going to do is you want to put a metal anvil into it. So when you made the wood, you made right now temporarily this area in which you can stick the metal anvil. But when you put the metal anvil in there, you're never going to separate it. That's not called a base kibble. So I guess if it's made by a blacksmith, that means this guy's always going to be using it to make rough work. Even though there is a base kibble, it was only made in order for you to have where to insert the metal. And you're never going to remove it. But even here, there's an exception, because anvils that were used, different hammers that were used for very expensive metals, it's amazing that every drop of gold is gold. Let's read it inside. But if it was made from jewelers, it's makabel tuma, because because they would every now and then, doesn't mean every second, but every now and then they would remove the metal part from the wooden part. This is one block. Why would they remove it? Because some of the gold, some of the silver, when they're working with it, can get stuck in it, and that has value. And not only that, he's happy for that because it doesn't get lost. So therefore, we say even though it's generally always filled, therefore it's considered not pshuta kliyetz, but a kliyetz that has a base kibble. That's makabel tuma midoiraisa. Halacha dalid hakaf echokuk. If you have a cup that was carved under the legs of the beds, under the legs of the chest. So today you have these little felt things that you stick under the legs, right? So it doesn't scratch the floor. What did they have then? They had little cups. And what they did was because let's say if the leg of your bed is sharp, it's going to ruin your floor. But they had these cups that were very rounded in the bottom. And you inserted the leg of a bed in those little cups. You were never going to remove them. It's a klibul. It remains starred. The aim by mishum clay kibul, because it's not made lekabel. It's made to support the furniture. In other words, it's going to stay faithful. It's made to support the furniture. Another rule. If you have a little piece of straw, it's makabel tuma b'chol kliyei shemakabel tuma. Even if the only thing that you can use it for to be makabel is one drop, because we began this halacha that the substance, right? It cannot be a esrog peel, but it's already considered more substantial, and it's kosher. When you hollow out a reed, now these reeds you have to know what they are. These reeds, even though you hollowed it out, still had some white sap in it. So he says that until you remove the white sap, it's still considered full, and there's no clay kibble. Anyway, furthermore, if you didn't cut it lekabala, even if it has some sort of natural something, if it's not made for it, then harehi kepshuta kliyetz, which means minatoid it's not makabel tuma. Avol, however, shifay fedesh shal pakuois, hollow stems of pakuois, of vegetables, just to make it clear, they are not called kalim because they are vegetables. They have a din of oichalim, and that follows all of the halachas we learned in the previous series of Hilchos Tumas Eichal. Halacha hey, shefay feresh shechatah. You have a straw and you cut the straw. The nasan ba es hamezuzah. Now, guys, it's very important that today we have these plastic mezuzah cases. Here in this halacha, we will differentiate between something in which you put the mezuzah that's attached to the doorpost, chibur arai, versus something that's attached to the doorpost, chibur kavua. And yes, we learned at the end of the previous chapter the exception that a tanur, even though it's mechubar lakarkas makabel tuma, we're going to be touching upon this again. Because again, generally, if something is connected to the mezuzah, which is connected to your house, which is connected to the ground, is not makabel tuma. Hold on. So here we go. People would insert the mezuzah in the straw. So if you cut out this straw and you put a mezuzah in it, and the key again, you connected it on your house temporarily. So first you put a mezuzah in it, and only then you put it on the kaisel, not kavua. Ara, yes. Even if you put it upside down, normally a base kibble, you need to have the open side up. When it comes to a mezuzah, as we all know, you roll up the mezuzah. So if the mezuzah is tight inside the mezuzah case, even mayos, if you turn it upside down, even if it's open, it's not going to roll out because it's tightly in there. That's the case. So even though it's upside down, it's still mekabel tumah. Why? I'll tell you why. Because the main thing is that it was not affixed to the door ba'ofen kavua, even though it's affixed, but it's fixed arai and it's upside down. It's still mekabel tumah. It's considered a clay cable. However, if kava ba'koisel, if it was affixed properly, that means the open side is facing up, then it's still mekabel tumah. Wow, that's a big chiddush. In other words, since you put the mezuzah in it prior to you affixing it, at that time it was called a keli, whose function was to hold your mezuzah. Even after affixing it, it's still serving that same purpose. It's amazing. Big chiddush. Even though it's affixed, it's still called a kibble. But if you put it upside down, why? Because it's fixed kavua, which is normally the rule. Now, if instead of first putting in the mezuzah, first you attach the mezuzah case. In our case, again, you have the straw. First, you attached it to the wall, and then you put in the mezuzah. If it's facing up, again, you attached it to the wall. But if you put it upside down, and the way you put the mezuzah in it is, again, its tightness keeps it stuck in there. All of this is because you did not affix it properly. Prior to you using it, afilu the right way, that means the opening is facing up, it's going to be tohaira. So that's what the general rule is that if something is a keli and it was used prior to you affixing it, you put the mezuzah in it prior to you attaching it, here, even if you affixed it properly, it's called a keli. Gavaldik. If you did not use it, you did not put the mezuzah prior to attaching it, you first attached it, now that's it, it's attached. Okay, right, Allah. A keli that's made out of, you weaved pieces of wood together somehow. You weaved sham. Sham is some sort of cork together. What is it used for? You're talking about a very rough keli, not to wear. In order for you to spread clothes over it, and by putting the mugmar melamata, so they used to fumigate clothing. Not, I know the word fumigation now is normally to get rid of bugs. Fumigation is that they didn't have bounce. So when you wanted the kalim, you wanted your garments to smell good. So they would have some sort of incense, and at the end of you cleaning your garments, you would put it over that incense, but it's going to burn. So you needed to have a keli that had at least walls that would keep your clothing above the mugmar, so the mugmar should not burn it. So some of them, mamish, they only had the walls. It was like a box only of the walls. So it's not a keli. If it was like a beehive, meaning it was mamish, no, you can't put anything in it. The mukmar was put on the ground. It was simply like 4 walls, so the begadim should not go on and get burnt. Then it's taught. But if it had one covering, in other words, the mukmar was underneath it. The kisoy was upon the kisoy, you put your begadim, then it's called mekabel tumah. Even though it's like upside down, but that's normally the way you make it. Halach zayin sandal shel behema. Men, now I want you to know the rule. That Rambam doesn't write the words here, but the rules is behemas are not mekabel tumah, that we learned. So mishamshei behemas are also not mekabel tumah. However, certain things were made for animals, but people would also use them. There would be mishamshei yadam. One such example sometimes would be the shoes that you fit under animals. If they're made out of metal, tamei, because many times people would remove it and they would use it as a cup. Vishal sham, if it's made out of kortar, because she'ein zechashuv miklei kabbalah, and again, the part of what you have to add over here is that it's misham shebehem. Halacha 8, which is the final halacha in this chapter, hatsoired margolis ba'od. So we began this chapter about a base kibble. I don't care about the size. We did say that it has to be something that lasts a little bit. If it only lasts as manmuat, right, because you made it out of the peels of an esrog, it's not a blaze kibble. Now we're speaking about you have a hide is flat. What happens if you put a pearl in it? It makes a little dent in it. What happens if you put coins in it? It makes a little dent in it. So the Rambam will tell you that there's a difference whether you had a pearl, whether you had coins. Let me say it by heart. When you put coins in it, you are constantly opening it up and closing it, opening it and closing it. It never made a proper dent. It's going to be undone very quickly. When you put precious stones like the pearl over here or a large diamond, you kept it in there for a long time. So even after you remove it, the dent in the hide lasts long enough, halachically, for it to be considered something with a receptacle. That's the final halach. So if you're hiding a pearl in a hide, and after you remove it, you still have a nishar mekayma amok, you have some sort of hollow in the flat hide, it's considered mekabel tuma. Until that hollow goes away, it's substantial enough, it's long-lasting enough. As we began, and it's like a little kiss, it's like a little pocket. But that was because when people hide precious stones in hides, they leave it there for a long time. But if you use a bundle of coins, you take a piece of hide and you wrap it around coins. Now coins you're constantly using. You're opening it, you're closing it, you're opening it, you're closing it. Because it doesn't have enough of a permanent dent for it to be called a tzuras keli. To be continued.
Thank you.